Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to this first panel of the Middle East Institute's annual conference. I'll be the moderator, Jean-Louis Saman from the Institute. In this first panel, we're going to unpack a lot of what the Minister was mentioning during his keynote address. We'll be looking in particular at the current security environment, and we'll be and we'll be asking ourselves how much of the regional fault lines have changed over the past 2 years, specifically since the Gaza war started. Due to the time constraint, I'm not going to go through all the events of the last 2 years, the Gaza war, the Israel-Hezbollah war of last October, or more recently the so-called 12-day war between Israel and Iran. And also one thing that we almost forget in all of these chains of events, the collapse of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria last December. This is the tour d'horizon in just 30 seconds of 2 years of the Middle East. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack, and some of the questions we'll be covering include what are the political, military objectives of the current governments in the region, and in particular in Israel, in Iran, and in Syria. How much of the current situation is a reflection of the political leaders in those countries, and how do those countries prioritize their foreign policies vis-à-vis neighbors in the region, or vis-à-vis external partners such as Gulf states or the US or China. To break it all down, we have three distinguished speakers with us. To my left, we have Dr. Alam Saleh, who's a senior lecturer in Iranian studies at the Center for Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University. Dr. Saleh is also a reviews editor for the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies. He received his PhD, MA, and BA from the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds. He's a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and he has previously taught undergrad and graduate courses on international relations, Middle East politics, at Lancaster, Exeter, and Durham universities. He also been engaged with policy practitioners, external professional bodies such as the UK Ministry of Defense, NATO, or the European Council on Foreign Relations. Then we have Dr. Nanar Hawash, who is the senior analyst for Syria at the International Crisis Group, who's specializing in conflict dynamics, security, politics, and governance. He's based in Dubai, and he conducts regular fieldwork in Syria. He was actually flying from Syria, as I understand, so great timing to have him discussing this topic. His recent research focuses on strategies to stabilize the country's transition, addressing security challenges, and he frequently briefs diplomats, policymakers, and international organizations on developments in Syria. And finally, to my far left, without any ideological indication, Neri Zilber, who's a journalist and analyst covering Middle East politics. He's currently a correspondent for the Financial Times and also serves as an advisor to Israel Policy Forum, where he hosts the Israeli Policy Pod and podcast. Neri's work has previously appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, The Atlantic, among other outlets, and he holds degrees from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service and King's College London's War Studies Department. Now, without further ado, let's start right away our discussion. The way we will proceed, we will start with about 45 minutes of discussion with our speakers. And then we'll move to the Q&A session for the other 45 minutes. So let me turn to our speakers. And first, let's try to assess the security situation in the Middle East. And I know it's a challenge to do that in 20 minutes. But let me ask first Neri Zilber the first question, and to go straight to the most obvious issue at stake, which is the Gaza war, and the ongoing new plan of the Israeli government in Gaza, especially the operation in Gaza City as we speak. Right. In your view, what is the end state of this current government, and what should we expect from this latest offensive on Gaza City?
This on? Okay. Thank you, Jean-Luc, for a very kind introduction. It's great to be back in Singapore. I spent 6 wonderful years here as a child, so it's a great honor for me to be back. And thank you for the Middle East Institute for having me. Look, the end state in Gaza, it's a question everyone's been asking or been wanting to ask for quite a long time. I can just say that officially the Israeli position has been quite clear. It's been articulated now for several weeks by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We can get into the details in just a second. The Gaza City offensive also we'll touch on as well in just a second. But look, there are also unofficial Israeli positions, sometimes articulated, sometimes not, which we should also acknowledge. The Prime Minister in Israel has made very clear that he wants to see the Gaza war end in 5 ways. Number 1, Hamas needs to disarm. Number 2, Gaza needs to be demilitarized. Number 3, all the hostages released. Number 4, Israel will retain security control over the Gaza Strip. And number 5, Israel, after it potentially defeats Hamas, will hand over administration to an unnamed alternative civilian administration, non-Hamas, but also non-Palestinian Authority. That is the official position of the Israeli government. Unofficially, as I'm sure some of us are aware, there are elements within the government, sometimes at the very top of the Israeli government, who want to see an implementation of the Trump Riviera plan, as it were. They want to see the voluntary immigration, and I use that term with heavy quotation marks, of the Palestinians out of Gaza, and for many in the Israeli government to resettle the Gaza Strip with Israeli settlers. That is the unofficial end state of the war for many in the Israeli government. Now, the realistic version, to my mind, look, I don't think Hamas will unilaterally disarm and unilaterally release all the hostages. I've said this publicly. I've also written this. Netanyahu's demands of Hamas, while actually quite reasonable for many Israeli minds and also people outside of Israel, seem very unlikely. Netanyahu is asking for the unconditional surrender of Hamas, full stop. Not a partial deal to halt the war for 2 months anymore, but a full deal to end the war and Hamas to unconditionally capitulate. Now, that may happen. Many things may happen. I deem it unlikely. Hamas has made it now almost 23 months through a very, very difficult and devastating war. They have even less to lose now than they did on the night of October 6, 2023, when Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def decided to launch this catastrophe on their own people and also, by the way, on the Israeli people. So this is the reality of the situation. I also don't think that the Trump Riviera plan will really get off the ground for a variety of reasons. We don't need to belabor the point. But that is the end state as we see it. We're slowly but also rapidly drifting into an end state, and this is to your point about the Gaza City offensive, where things will both get worse and likely get even worse, where you have a situation where Israel, for its part, is drifting towards military rule, right? Because Gaza City, the IDF, the Israeli military, can take over Gaza City, but I highly doubt it will lead to Hamas's acceptance of Netanyahu's 5 points. And then there will also be remaining pockets of Hamas control in Gaza. So you're kind of slowly and rapidly drifting towards Israeli military control with all that that entails, both for Gazans and, by the way, for the Israeli public, especially the Israeli taxpayer, combined with an end state where the minister put it well. There's one country in the world that can exert pressure for Israel to stop this. Also, by the way, exert pressure on other parties to stop this war. That's the U.S. president, Donald Trump. He may lose patience, and depending on the day, depending on the comment, he may be losing patience or not. But so far, he is strongly supportive of the offensive into Gaza City. I think he believes, or he's been led to believe, that this will be a determinative and kind of consequential operation that will lead to Hamas's defeat. I'm skeptical. So really, it's a hinge moment in the war. And I will just say that, to my earlier point about things getting worse, you can, I think in just a few hours, there will be an article coming out in the Financial Times, precisely to answer your point, your question, Jean-Luc, about the offensive into Gaza City. You should all subscribe and read that article, not just because I wrote it, but really, you have 1 million people in Gaza City at the moment. The Israeli army wants them to evacuate southward to a region that's already been devastated with very little humanitarian infrastructure in place. Even the IDF assesses that at least 30% of the 1 million people will not leave Gaza City for a variety of reasons, whether lack of resources, despair, fear. So you have hundreds of thousands of potential uninvolved Gazans remaining in the city with the IDF's intention to at least take control of that city. Like I said, a hinge moment in the war where things could get worse, not only for Gazans themselves, but also Israeli soldiers, as well as Israel's international standing. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Neri, for this first look at the offensive on Gaza City and more broadly the evolution in Gaza. We'll certainly go back to that, but let me turn to Dr. Saleh to get your perspective on Iran and especially 2 years after the start of the Gaza war. And the general conversation in think tanks, in policy circles, when it comes to Iran, is that Iran has suffered several blows throughout those 2 years. Its non-state partners, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon or Hamas in Gaza, have been severely weakened. We saw more specifically also how the Israeli-American operation last June destroyed a significant number of military nuclear facilities inside Iran. So what is your assessment right now on the state of the regime in Tehran, domestically and externally? And how, if we had to imagine what comes next, how could the leaders in Tehran adapt to the new regional environment?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you for such a great opportunity. Thank you, Middle East Institute. Thank you, Singapore. Key historical events actually plays very important role in shaping and reshaping a state's policies and its doctrines, whether it be the security doctrine or regional policies or internal and domestic affairs. For Iran, at least from September 11th to October 7th, 3 different levels and dynamics played very important role in informing Iran's policies and security doctrine in general. First of all, at the international level, the shift between the West and the rest, actually what we call it depluralism, or the narrowing gap between the Western powers and the rest of the world, and the growing new emerging powers internationally, non-Western world, namely China, India, and Russia, and probably the BRICS actually members, are playing very important role in shifting Iran's a mindset towards the West in general, particularly since September 11, when the heavy presence of United States in the region has been considered by Tehran as a key threat to Iran's national security. At the international level, though, the Iran has been supporting this shift from the Western-dominated world order into the less Western world. And in so doing, the Look East policy towards particularly China and Russia, India, and other Asian powers actually has been adopted by Tehran in order to replace, as an alternative to the Western, again, hegemonic power in the region and beyond. Regionally, at the second level, actually, it's regional changes and shifts. Middle East has been shifting, changing, shaping, and reshaping at least since 2003 Iraq War. We have been actually observing a new Middle East that has been through many key historical events. And key historical events, again, are revisiting our views and visions toward the region, not only in terms of states policy, but also academics' understanding of terms, concepts, and views, and even assesses the theories that we often employ in order to understand different regions. Therefore, the 2003 Iraq War actually changed the Middle East once and forever. Followed particularly by the so-called Arab Spring in 2010, 2011, on forth. Then what we see here is the decline of the nation-state building. Actually, the Middle East has been suffering from the incomplete process of nation-state building already. This weakening the traditionally constructed Middle East as a nation-state has been further weakened. The rise of non-state actors played very important role. The transnationality nature of the region, extreme transnationality nature of the region actually also played important role in filling the gap that has occurred since 2003. And I will relate how Iran played a role in filling these gaps, both in terms of international level dynamic. Iran tries to play as a mediator between the West and the East in order to accelerate this process of West-less world order by moving towards the East again. Regionally tries to fill the gap that has occurred as a result of the Iraq War, followed by the Arab Spring in Syria, in Yemen, and even in Afghanistan, and so on. And therefore, it changed the balance of power in the region. And therefore, Iran's key policy in the region since then was to survive. And to survive needed to move beyond its borders, the so-called defense in depth kind of doctrine. Not to wait for the United States and its allies in the region to bring the war into Iranian territories, but to move towards them in order to make their presence in the region so costly, and as a result, to make them think twice before attacking Iran. Of course, Iran, at the third level, however, internally and domestically, Iran also suffers because of the disenchantment between the people and the states. So there is a growing gap between the states and the society in Iran. The issue of legitimacy is something that Tehran has been deeply concerned about so far, at least. And of course, the sanctions are beating and hitting Iran's economy badly. And this, again, intensifies this state-society relationship. And as a result, what we see here is Iran's both foreign policy and internal policy has been informed by first security survival, second economy and how to deal with the sanctions, particularly in the post JCPOA era to 2018 when the United States withdrawn from the deal agreement, and internally, of course, the issue of legitimacy. And at these three levels, what we see is that Iran's foreign policies is concerned about. However, the 12 days war has changed almost everything so dramatically. At least it's intensified and deepened and widened all these three dimensions: international, regional, and internal, and the multifaceted characters such as security, economy, and domestic internal legitimacy. The 12 Days War has been, of course, another key historical event that changed Iran once and forever. It might change the region again, and the balance of power and deterrence and our understanding of deterrence in the region once and forever. However, the question remains to be answered. Can Iran survive? The question again is, what were the objectives of Israel and United States in attacking Iran? If the attack was aimed at destroying Iran's nuclear facilities fully, I don't know. I think we can firmly argue that this did not happen. At least we don't know what the attack is. Even United States attack, because Israel doesn't have the capability to destroy Iran's nuclear sites, particularly Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan 1. It doesn't have a B-2, it doesn't have this bunker thingy, bombs in order to destroy these facilities. The question now remains to be answered whether United States has the capability or not. So in terms of nuclear capability, Iran was the threshold nuclear state. Now is ambiguous. Everything is even worse because a day before the attack, at least there were some observations. International organization, IAEA, UN had some control over what's going on with Iran nuclear facilities. Now we don't have any. We don't know whether the 400 kilogram enriched uranium are were hidden. So in this case, Israel failed to achieve its objective. Secondly, the regime change probably was another objective. I was in Iran during the 12 Days War. I would argue that it did not actually achieve its objectives in terms of regime change. Actually, it made Iranian actually more concerned about external threats and external invasion and so on. So at the moment, Iran is dealing with all these three multifaceted, multidimensional forces, internationally, regionally, and internally. And the issue whether the West has any clear strategy to deal with Iran is yet to be seen. We don't see any clear strategic kind of approach towards Iran. Pushing and attacking Iran and more sanctions on Iran may make Iran more dangerous than dealing with it in a more diplomatic way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleh, for your insights. And we'll come back to the specific future of the regime in a few minutes. But before that, let me turn to Dr. Hawash to add Syria to our overview. And it has been more or less 9 months since the collapse of the Assad regime. And we've seen that the situation inside Syria is not yet stabilized. There are some positive developments. We saw the lifting of US sanctions decided by Donald Trump. We see also quite significant support from the Gulf states. But we also witness some troubling indicators when it comes to the government being tightly controlled by HTS, the organization, the former Al-Qaeda branch that was led by Mr. Shara. And we see also sectarian violence more recently in Sueda. So 2 questions for you. First, should we be optimistic or pessimistic about Syria? And more specifically about Ahmed al-Shara, the current president, would you say that he's too much of a strongman, or is he actually too weak to contain his former terrorist colleagues? So those are the questions for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and I'll just dive straight into the answers. So 9 months after the post-Assad phase, and we see the new authorities in Syria making remarkable gains when it comes to foreign policy and their foreign approach. However, this approach doesn't really apply when we look at the domestic policies. Domestically, there's 3 gaps that stand in between Damascus and stability. So the authorities establishing any stability. And these gaps are political, security, and economic. And you're going to see also some similarities in their approaches. So politically, we see Shara having only establishing power or giving power within a narrow circle, which hinders his ability to establish legitimacy, which makes it difficult for him to establish control. The second aspect is the security approach. Shara heavily focuses or over-relies on the use of force, on coercive methods when it comes to dealing with domestic issues. And thirdly, we have the economic aspect, and he also relies on a narrow circle of loyalists in the economic aspects. And then it reaches to your question of whether to be optimistic or pessimistic. That said, if these policies continue, domestically continue, it's going to be problematic, and it's going to lead to issues of legitimacy, issues of stability, as the example you gave in Sueda. Sueda is basically relying on a coercive approach in dealing with a domestic issue through the over-reliance on the use of force, and is the acts of excluding different parties and different communities, and this led to an intercommunal clash or dispute that happens over and over to expand into a conflict that draws in international actors. So it's very important right now for us to keep an eye on Shara's domestic approach and domestic policies. If these policies are changed, then yes, we do have signs to be optimistic. If not, then that's going to be a problem. When it comes to him being a strong man, I would argue that Syria right now needs somewhat of a strong man, because it needs someone that balances different powers that do not want to sit on the same table, that actually they want to kill each other. You have the more radical circles that support Shara, but you also have the general population, mostly Sunni Arab population, that also give some support to Shara. And you have different actors that maybe do not support Shara, but would sit on the table with him. The thing is, with him being a strong man, he needs to be a strong man with all these different circles. The problem right now Shara is facing is that he's a strong man in some venues, in some areas, but actually looks the other way in other areas. And he needs to be a strong man, especially with his more narrow and let's say even narrower radical base, in order to establish control and to present himself as the leader of Syria. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hawash. We see some common themes here with regards to the influence of domestic politics and the importance of leadership. So that actually leads to the next round of questions I had for each of you. And let me go back to the situation in Israel with a question for Neri Zilber. And everyone probably in the room remember that after October 7, everyone was thinking, was gambling, or was betting that Netanyahu was politically dead, that he could not survive something like the attack of October 7, at least politically. We're almost 2 years later, and most, I think, of the commanders at the military or the intelligence level at the time of the attack have resigned. Netanyahu is still here. So for a foreign audience who's struggling to understand Israeli politics, how do you explain that? And what should we expect actually in the coming months, given that the next elections, as far as I understand, are scheduled in November, but November 2026, right? So what can happen now?
Easy questions. Thank you, John. Look, this is the one question I get asked more than any other, both by my bosses, definitely, and also even people inside Israel. How is it that he has been able to survive the worst disaster to befall, the state of Israel in its history, and we're now almost 2 years to the day with no end in sight in terms of Netanyahu's own political longevity and career. We'll get to that in just a second. PhDs, I think, will be written on this topic, but not in the poli-sci or government or Middle East department. It'll be the psychology department. All kidding aside, there's a simple answer and then there's a more complicated answer. The simple answer is that he was able to keep his coalition together. It's a coalition government, and essentially there's only two other flanks. There's the far-right parties, and then there's the ultra-Orthodox parties, and Netanyahu's own Likud party, and he was able to keep it together. Despite the perception to the contrary, it's a lot more difficult than people think to topple a government in Israel, just in terms of parliamentary procedure. So that is the simple answer. He was able to keep his coalition together, and it's difficult to topple a government, and so here we are almost 2 years later. The more complicated answer, look, Netanyahu is a political master, and we know this for a fact, and it's also been reported that very, very early in the days after October 7th, when literally the dust hadn't yet settled, he was already planning on how he was going to repair the political damage at home. And this is a whole kind of media and public campaign. We don't need to get into the details, but suffice to say that he tried and amongst his supporters succeeded in putting all the blame for this disaster and this massacre in southern Israel on not him, right? Everyone but him. He just happened to be the prime minister on that morning, but the buck doesn't stop there. So the security chiefs that you mentioned, they're all gone. By the way, some of them resigned, some of them were fired or ousted. And really, if you follow the right-wing media ecosystem in Israel, there has been a campaign now for, I don't want to say 2 years, but maybe a little short of 2 years, where really the prime minister and the government have nothing to do with this disaster, and it's all on the security chiefs and even on the protesters on the streets, the anti-government protesters. So there's, number one, the political and media campaign, which has been quite successful on its own terms to maintain support for Netanyahu and the coalition, relatively speaking. Number two, we have to talk about the opposition in Israel. whether due to its lack of political talent or whether due to major strategic miscalculations, it hasn't been able to provide a real alternative, whether in parliament or outside of parliament publicly. We have to also keep in mind the first week after October 7th, an opposition party led by Benny Gantz joined the coalition, joined Netanyahu in government, this kind of national unity emergency wartime government, I think was the official term. And that also buttressed Netanyahu politically and publicly. The burden was shared. Anyone could have told Benny Gantz, and people did tell Benny Gantz, that this wasn't going to end well for him, and it was going to end better for Netanyahu. And Netanyahu used Benny Gantz and his party politically and then discarded them, a little over a year ago, last summer. So the opposition really failed both in parliament politically and also just publicly to put forward an alternative vision, an alternative message. And then finally, really, this speaks to Israeli society and the public right now. The country is traumatized still from October 7th. It's exhausted, 2 years of war. There have been demonstrations on the street, obviously, more for the hostages, right? That was a major point of emphasis, also against the government, but mostly to get the hostages back. But really, the numbers haven't been even close to those preceding October 7th, when there was massive domestic internal upheaval over Netanyahu and his government's intention to overhaul the judicial system in Israel. And there are various reasons for that, but really, if you have rockets and missiles incoming for months and months, less now, but it was the case, the reality on the ground in Israel for many months, whether from Gaza, from Lebanon, at certain moments from Iran, from the Houthis in Yemen, etc., it's very difficult to motivate yourself and your loved ones and your friends to get out on the streets. So really the sense of exhaustion, also a sense of kind of wartime rallying around the flag. So really that is my best explanation as to how Netanyahu is still in power. But I agree with you, John Loop. I was one of those people early in the war looking at Netanyahu's public messages and saying, oh, he still thinks he's prime minister. He's walking around like he's still the prime minister. He's the last one to realize his political career is over. I was definitely wrong about that point. But then I'll end with this. In terms of what we can expect moving forward, there are two key moments coming up, end of October and April. So the end of October, this is when Parliament in Israel comes back from its very long recess. Netanyahu has a real domestic political crisis, not having much to do with the war, about conscripting the ultra-Orthodox into the IDF. The ultra-Orthodox officially have left his coalition. Unofficially, they're still part of the coalition, but officially they've left. So he needs to resolve that, or else his coalition could be in real trouble, and that will trigger snap elections. Or April, when he has to pass a budget. It will also not be easy to pass a budget, especially in an election year, especially in wartime, given all the expenditures on the war. But you can't count him out. I think it's very clear from his behavior since the Iran war this summer, and his kind of messaging now and political decisions since then. I think Netanyahu wants to make it to late 2026 and have elections then. There was an idea that he might go himself for snap elections. I think that's no longer operative. I think he's going to try to keep this coalition together for as long as possible. If it's up to him, it may not be up to him, but he'll try.
Thank you very much, Neri. Let me turn back to Iranian politics now, which is probably as challenging as Israeli politics. And you mentioned, Dr. Saleh, that you were in Iran at the time of the 12-day war, and that you mentioned the fact that in your views, the idea of regime change didn't succeed, and that actually you saw more like the strengthening of the regime throughout the war. There's been a lot of speculations, and I'm sure you get that question all the time, about the succession of Ayatollah Khamenei, who, for the information of the audience, is 86 years old this year, at least according to his Wikipedia page. How do you see the future of Iran after Ayatollah Khamenei, and how different, if we imagine a next leader, how different would it be from Iran today?
Well, Thank you. Good question. Actually, I would say the 12 Days War is led into both threats and opportunity for Tehran. Yes, again, it's a key historical event that changes Iran, probably changes the region for many years to come, in both in practice and also in theory. Yes, people stayed loyal to Iran during the war, I would say. Almost we have zero protests, something that probably Israel hoped to see during the campaign against Iran. However, staying loyal to Iran is also cost the regime in Tehran. That means it also raises their expectations towards the government, towards the politics. Usually key, again, significant historical events is a great opportunity for states in general to reconsider, redefine, and revisit their policies, key structural policies. And that is the opportunity for Tehran to take in order to redefine the state-society relations. This growing disenchantment between the state and people has been continually kind of growing in the past years, and we have seen and observed many popular uprisings in Iran. I would say the 12 Days War killed these popular protests for many years to come. There won't be any. And this is historical. It's been witnessed that when there is an external threat, especially when it comes to the territorial integrity of certain country, it unites people. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iran, despite the fact of being a very multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, people stayed loyal to Tehran against the so-called, again, external threats. And the 12 Days War actually had a counterproductive implication for Israel, I would say. But again, people stayed loyal. People already had their own expectations, their own demands, and this is also rising. We see reformists, for instance, that have been marginalized for many years are now again growing, and their voices are more heard across the country. And I've seen this myself, sitting and talking to these reformist-minded, are now more and more vocal. And if prior to the war, the succession of Ayatollah Khamenei was almost easy and straightforward, now is not. Now there will be more debates and more problematic. It would be more problematic to success with his son, probably, with the support of IRGC. And this is, again, is not something that probably United States and Israel would have hoped when they have invaded Iran. So therefore, there will be more discussions, probably more power struggle, more compromises amongst the different factions within the political system. The political system has been deeply fragmented again before the war. Now we see, yes, again, when it comes to the Iranians themselves, the politicians are there is an ongoing arguments and debates. However, when it comes to the external interventions, we see that they are almost all united against any kind of external threats, particularly when they see what happens to Afghanistan, what happens to Iraq, what happens to Syria, what happens to Yemen, what happens to Libya. And Iranians are usually very, very quite conscious about the territorial integrity of their country, historically speaking. Therefore, the discourse is changing in Iran. The discourse prior to the war was almost defined at 4 different levels and facets. One was a nationalist discourse. We want to defend our territories. Second, the Shiism, to move beyond the border and to reach the Shia community in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Bahrain. They also have adopted this Shia discourse in order the so-called defining the Shia shrines and so on. Third level and facets was the Islamism. In order to move beyond the Shia communities and to reach the Sunni Muslims, Islamism also being part of their discourse and adopted in order to reach out the non-Shia communities in the region and beyond. The fourth one was targeting the secular Arab, non-Arab Middle Easterners, and that was anti-imperialism. Anti-American, anti-Israeli sentiments, anti-Western, anti-colonialism, and this kind of stuff in order to reach a secular communities across the region and beyond again. And now what we see as a result of changes and shifts in the region, these discourses are also redefined, and it's more mainly and only focuses, especially during the war, we see is more nationalistic, more chauvinistic kind of approach towards defending Iran, defending Iranian territories, defending Iranian history, defending Iranian glory, and also moving towards the emotionally driven symbols that plays clear role in defining Iranian identity, moving again beyond Islam and Islamism and Shiism, focusing on nationalistic approach.
Thank you very much. And before we move to the Q&A, let me ask one last question to Dr. Hawash, and in particular on the foreign policy of Syria. And you mentioned the differences, or I would say maybe almost the gaps between the domestic politics of the new government and its foreign policy. With regards to foreign policy, we saw very quickly that one of the key priorities was the Gulf. I think the first foreign trip of Ahmed al-Shara was to Saudi Arabia. But interestingly, there were also some more surprising moves. In particular, is apparent openness to the idea of engaging with Israel. So what, if you had to sum up, what are the diplomatic objectives of al-Shara as of today?
Yeah. Al-Shara's foreign policy revolves around one single calculation, which is external legitimacy is the currency that buys economic reform. This is where his main focus is. This is the signals that he's been sending even during the military campaign that took over different Syrian cities and led to taking over to Damascus. He's been sending signals and messages to potential allies and to enemies. Al-Shara's approach has been to de-escalation, pragmatism abroad, of course, and bargaining, and very importantly, avoiding making new enemies. And then going to Turkey and the Gulf, which I would say those are the most important. It is an obvious priority because the Gulf and Turkey are where the financial and political oxygen lies, and this is what he prioritizes, and this is where you see the difference in approaching the Gulf, Turkey on one side, and then Europe on the other side. Al-Shara doesn't see the same level of economic and political gains from Europe. That's why he doesn't prioritizes European countries as much. That said, Sharia also provided or gave reassurances to Western capitals and accepted their red lines, which includes fighting radicalism, especially ISIS, curbing Iranian proxies, fighting, raging a war on drugs, chemical weapons. But if you can look at the trend, all of these reassurances do not really have to do with governance domestically or dealing with the Syrian population. So those were easy reassurances for Sharia. Moving to Israel, immediately Sharia and his government have shown flexibility, and they sent a signal to Israel that they prefer calm over any confrontation. And despite that Israel has adopted a rather proactive and offensive or aggressive approach towards Syria, having incursions into the country, conducting airstrikes, it is reported that Israel have destroyed more than 70% of the new army's capabilities, even before the new army technically became a new army. Despite all of that, even until now, the Sharia has been advocating for pragmatism and reaching an agreement. And he has been sending a message globally that which is a common thread, let's say, that there is no ideological difference, that he doesn't pose an ideological threat. And I would finish by summarizing that basically, in other words, Damascus is exporting reassurance abroad in order to import a breathing space at home. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's now move to our Q&A session. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, and wait for the microphone to come. I'll also inform our audience online that you can ask your questions in the Zoom chat box, and we'll try as much as possible to ask the questions directly to the panelists. But let's take one question, two questions here. Yeah.
أسعد الشملان from the Saudi Diplomatic Institute in Riyadh. Thank you very much for the moderator and for the panelists. I have just three brief remarks, hopefully brief. The first one regarding Israel. And I think I want to convey to our audience here is that there has been really, if you look closely, lately, in the past few months, when the Israeli brutality in Gaza and in the West Bank become almost impossible for even the most sympathetic to Israel to justify, there has been a strategy of trying to make a distinction between the Netanyahu, or sometimes they say the Netanyahu government, and somehow Israel. And although there are differences, of course, within Israel, and there is a lively debate on many issues, but it has, I think it will be more useful to look at what is happening now and where we reached Gaza as part of the continuity of the way Israel has dealt with the Palestinians. Let me just alert you to just simple fact. In 2020, that is a full 3 years before the 7th of October, there is a report by the UN, which you can access over the internet. It described Gaza as uninhabitable. You know, the same word that we use now. They used it in 2020 as a result of Israeli policies. The Gaza as the largest open-air prison in the world. That was a description by an ex-British Prime Minister. In 2018, there was a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration completely, including disabled people who participated in it, and they were shot by Israel. Now, if we talk to the settlement issue, it goes back to the Labour government in the 70s. That was long before Likud. And we take Hamas for task for having a charter saying that they want one state in Palestine. Actually, they amended that. They accepted implicitly the existence of Israel. But the Likud party, which is supposedly a centrist party in Israel today, its honest charter, which you can access it over the internet, that there is no such thing as a Palestinian state. So the continuity, actually, what we have to see it is in terms of continuity of Israeli politics rather than a freak politics by one man or a group of people. And this is a huge problem for us in the region because moderate Arab governments have done everything. Saudi Arabia have put peace proposals since 1981. The Arab Peace Plan, which is originally a Saudi plan in 2002. But what you have in Israel is a rejection, and the rejection now is explicit. The two-state solution, if I may the two-state solution, just something the minister said that it's only performative. Actually, it's important. Why? Because it is put at a point where Israel said, we don't want to talk about the Palestinian two-state solution, and we don't want anyone to talk about two-state solution. So the initiative for a two-state solution is saying, no. The two-state solution is not an issue that you have with the Palestinians, it's an issue you have with the world. So it is more than, if you like, symbolic in a marginal sense. I want to talk about Iran just briefly. No, this one is briefly. I think the problem with Iran today really is, you can go to all sorts of things, but really it stems from a rather disastrous decision that was taken by Iran in the 90s to have a secret program and to try to weaponize and then to lie about it. And this has been really the price that they have been paying for it. Although actually, Mr. Saleh was saying that they are ambiguous. Actually, Iran, far from being a nuclear power to have a nuclear deterrence in the proper sense, it's not one bomb or one missile. You need an arsenal of that to achieve a nuclear deterrence. All strategists know that, and Iran far from that. So I think we have to. The second thing is that Iran did not fill gaps. Actually, it created gaps in the region. It fostered sectarianism. It has been hopefully now is a correcting policy. We hope so, but it has been a very destructive actor in the region. In terms of Syria, I appreciate your reservations, but I think many of us are really kind of salute what happened in Syria because no one expected that things will move in that direction. In fact, all the expectations, first that the Assad is lil abad for eternity, but also that if something happens, we will have all sorts of massacres all over Syria, and Syria will fall apart. I think it has been the achievement of Bashar government is to keep it apart. Of course, there are casualties, but my question is, what are the effects of his policies on his core followers? That is not the core followers or the people who came with him from Jabhat Tahrir al-Sham. Are they accepting the way that he is moving in terms of trying to amend relations with everyone, including trying to find some kind of an understanding with Israel? Is he in danger of losing his core followers or not? That's the question for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there was another. Let's take two questions.
For Dr. Saleh, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit further on this question of, as you said, the rising prominence or rising expression of reformist voices, even as there is, on the other hand, what you described as sort of this collapse of the four thematic elements of messaging by the regime into one that is more nationalist and chauvinist. So I have seen certainly some of the reformist voices speaking out on the nuclear issue, but I'm wondering whether they are in any sense beginning to subvert the notion that the IRGC project towards the region of 40 years was in a sense a failure.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to our panelists. Neri, would you like to comment on the comments or anything you want to add? Or
Sure. I'll be brief. Look, I think it's very easy to see the current moment as a continuation of Israeli policy vis-a-vis the Palestinians going back decades. I would submit respectfully that there have been other moments on this continuum, that you have had different governments in Israel with different policies, especially vis-a-vis the Palestinians, but also on many other issues, that have taken different decisions. Going back to 1993, going back now, over 30 years. And, while 30 years is a long time, it's not that long a period of time. And I would argue, or submit, again, respectfully, that the outlier here is the past over 15 years of primarily Benjamin Netanyahu rule in Israel. And again, this isn't to pick on one politician or another, trust me. But Netanyahu himself is an outlier, even compared to Netanyahu in the 1990s. In other words, Netanyahu, after he retook power in 2009, but really over the past primarily decade plus, he's maybe paid lip service to a real peace process and a diplomatic process with the Palestinians, but he hasn't really moved ahead on that in any real sense, as was mentioned earlier, I think, by the minister, going backwards on that. But Netanyahu himself is an outlier over the past 30 years. And we have to keep that in mind. And I would say that we didn't have a chance for your third question, Donloup, about Israel's international standing and projections for the future. But the coming election in Israel, whether end of this year, first quarter of next year, or in a year's time, will be, I don't want to use this word lightly, but existential for not only Israel's international standing, but Israel itself. And I include the Palestinian issue on that, but on a whole host of other issues as well. So I think we have to allow the possibility of change, allow the possibility of positive change, and allow the possibility of a democracy, hopefully, choosing different leaders.
It's not a simple question. So we met with some people in this kind of more radical base. This includes foreign fighters as well. Their main focus is they didn't mention Israel. If that was your question, the issues or the potential grievances have to do with two things. One, the spoils, or not getting enough, or not getting spoils. The second is how a Sharia treats other Syrian populations, whether that Sunni Arabs in Damascus, or a more conservative or moderate, so less radical, or it could be different minority groups. These are the issues. And with the more radical and active terrorist groups like Saraya Ansar Sunnah, they actually take an advantage of how any positive steps taken by a Sharia towards these groups. However, that said, we see two common trends within the more radical groups at large. Obeying the leader, al-amr wa ta'a, they say it specifically, we obey the leader although we might disagree, and waiting for any potential profits, or focusing on the profits. And profits could be them taking a position in the Ministry of Defense, for example, or taking an area, whatever. It could be any types of profits. They look at Syria and the Syrian state from a more a profit perspective. I would give very quickly, one interesting example, I would say, and this is the good side of doing field work, is I have these fun anecdotes. I don't know, fun to me. We were talking with a foreign fighter who has been fighting all his life. We were sitting in a mall in Damascus. And just to explain how the situation, it's like you walk into a mall in here, there's nothing special, nothing unique. And he was sitting, and then his wife was wearing a full khimar, and he was saying that basically, yeah, we understand that this area or this city is not for us. We accept that. We fought enough. We're tired. We don't want to fight anymore. And we're actually fine going back to Idlib. So it's an area in northwestern Syria that is more conservative and accepts more conservative approach to Islam. And he said that we're fine going there, and we don't want to antagonize anyone, and we accept people in Damascus living their way. We took this as a positive sign of this fatigue of the radical groups. So I will end, although this positive example, by saying, that said, there's going to be, of course, more security issues and more groups that will pose a security threat, but I don't see it being anything other than a security threat.
Thank you. 3 points and questions on Iran. Yes, actually, when it comes to Iran's capability to be a nuclear power or not, I would say all these nuclear powers have started with making one bomb, and then they make it 100 and 200 and probably a few thousands. So the first bomb, Iran has all the facilities, all the materials needed to make the basic materials to make a bomb, according to all probably experts on nuclear power. The question is to what extent Iran is able to, in terms of speed and in terms of power, to make the bomb, to weaponize it. And I would argue, if Iran makes its first bomb, it would deter Israel to attack Iran again, like what happened. So my argument is that Israel's policy towards Iran is making Iran more and more dangerous for Israel. Persuading President Trump in 2018 to withdraw from the JCPOA when Iran was committed to enrich only less than 4% uranium, actually led Iran to enrich uranium up to 20%, something that Prime Minister Netanyahu considered it as a very, very dangerous in the United Nations, the General Assembly. Then targeting Iranian nuclear facilities and killing Iranian IRGC nuclear scientists, no matter what you call them, actually increased Iran enriching uranium from 20% to 60%. Okay? Now attacking Iran, 12 days war, it was impressive in terms of media. But who knows that Iran has no 90% enriched uranium now? So the question is that the pressure doesn't necessarily kill. It doesn't make you stronger, but it makes you definitely more dangerous. Iran doesn't have any bargaining power when it comes to diplomacy. Imagine you sit with United States diplomats and you want to bargain. What do you want to tell them? You need a nuclear facilities enrichment to be able to bargain, to give and to get. Otherwise, you won't be able to tell the American diplomats that you won't export pistachio or Persian carpets to you if you don't do this or that. You need to tell them that we have 90% enriched uranium. If you want to discuss, sit and let's solve it in a diplomatic way. B2 doesn't necessarily kill Iran nuclear technology and project. So they will reach Iran. Iran has been, this is what I'll call it, the change in the deterrence perception. The change in the deterrence perception has changed, and that's why Iran was attacked. Because Iran's increasing its enrichment did not deter Israel and the United States to attack Iran. It's obvious. Now Iran needs to bargain in terms of how many bombs I have. I have 3. If you want me not to make them 9, let's sit and talk. Or I have 9. If you want me not to make it 20, let's sit and talk. So this is the problem, or this is the threat that I am thinking of. Iran, filling the gap, you just said Iran created the gap. Iran used the gap, managed it. The gap has been made by United States attacking Iraq. And when Saddam Hussein was executed, I would call it as in a very symbolic way, that this Arab nationalism has been the so-called pan-nationalism, extraterritorial identity of Arabism, has been killed with it. Or at least it created a great ideological gap in the Arab world. That's why it was followed by the so-called Arab Spring, a spread. Arab Nahbasism, Nasserism, Jamal, you call it whatever, has been badly created ideological gap that Iran was able to use this and fill it with this alternative to nationalism with Islamism. So this so-called secular Arab nationalism since Jamal Abdel Nasser in the 1950s has been shifted into the alternative, into Islamism. And Iranians were able to do so, and as I've said, with 3 levels: Shiism, Shia community, Islamism to reach the non-Shia Arab community in the region, and anti-imperialism towards the secular Arab communities. In terms of the points on what's the question in terms of the debate now that is ongoing between reformists and the so-called deep state in Iran, the reformists saying their argument is that this attack, Israel's attack, is the result of your ideological policies in the region. So you shouldn't have gone that far. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't, supported these groups. This idea of diminishing Israel out of the map is what caused us this 12 days war. On the other hand, in terms of this debate, this discursive debate is the narrative. We have another narrative, which is usually the deep state, the establishment, and so-called hardliners are adopting, and that is, it's all about power struggle. Ideology is the cover for this power struggle. Israel wants to be the hegemony, and this hegemonic power is not only concerning us, it's concerning the whole entire region. It wasn't Iran. Iran was the least country that was threatened during the 12 days war, I would say. Every single country was observing that Israel can do whatever they want without being accountable to anyone, without even taking into consideration any country in the region, and to attack Iran and to do whatever they want. Iran was able to defend itself somehow, less or whatever, but the other countries are observing this and are deeply concerned. So this is the debate at the moment, whether is Iran realist approach, is a realistic approach, or Iran should have chosen different path before the war.
Thank you very much. Next questions. Yes, in the back. And then Nisha.
Hi, my question is to Dr. Hawash on the Syria-Israel thing. You mentioned that the foreign policy of Syria is looking more pragmatic, signaling a more calm and more reconciliation kind of thing. Do you think Syria would take the route of Egypt and Jordan in how they created a peace security or a cold peace security with Israel, given the mutual border security concerns. In doing so, do you think Golan Heights would be a bigger factor? Or do you think Syria is still committed to its ideological commitments towards Palestine issue as well as the other things? What do you think are the real factors that will determine whether or not Syria will have that relationship? And also the fact that Syria has been moving more towards the approach of the Gulfs. So do you think it would, in considering relations with Israel, would it consider something more like the Abraham Accords? Would it lean towards Jordan and Israel, Jordan and Egypt kind of normalization?
We'll take another question. There was one, just a second row. Yeah, here.
Good morning, sirs. I have a question also about Syria. I was wondering if there were any updates on the administration and security of the SDF-controlled prisons in the northeast of the country, and whether or not that has been discussed between the current government in Damascus and the SDF. Thank you.
And let me add one question from the Zoom chat box. You can actually see some of them here, because we have mostly questions on Syria. But let me add one general question from Salman, who's joining us online, who's asking about the role of Russia and China with regards to the two-state solution. Given the fact, if I can add, given the fact that China played a role in restoring ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, do you see either Russia or China playing a role here? I should mention also that we'll be discussing the role of China later on in one of the other panels. But I'll add that if any of you wants to share his thoughts on this topic. But maybe let's start with Dr. Hawash, because a lot of the questions were directed to you.
As for Syria's approach to Israel, unfortunately for Syria, it lacks the leverage that Egypt or Jordan have in dealing with Israel. It lacks a lot of leverage. One, it's the new authorities gained power at a destroyed, in a destroyed country, and then the next day Israel made sure that whatever little army they had was 70% of it was non-existent, and then certain policies, internal policies, and I know I keep going back to internal policies, but in the end, domestic policies affect foreign ones. Domestic policies even made Damascus be on the back foot even more with Israel. So to very quickly answer your question, Damascus lacks almost any leverage right now with Israel, so it would be happy giving away a lot just for Israel to stop its hostilities towards Damascus. So the Palestinian cause is not something that Damascus is part of. Even Damascus's is not even on the negotiations table. All what Damascus wants right now from Israel is that it would stop its hostilities, even if Damascus would have less security presence in the south. And that's not something that Jordan or Egypt would ever accept. Going to the question about the administration over the prisons and the camps, just for the general public, these are ISIS or ISIS affiliated camps administrated by the authority Syrian Democratic Forces, which control 1/3 of northwestern Syria. So I would say there's three parts to this to answer this question. One, it's part of the talks between SDF and Damascus. Damascus wants this file very quickly, and they don't stop at any opportunity to kind of push for this file. So to give an example, there was a church bombing in Damascus, and then the authorities said, well, it's because of this, these camps are not well administrated. And why Damascus wants this file brings me to number 2. SDF views this file specifically as a leverage point with Western powers. SDF sees that Western powers only care about their own fighters, so French fighters in these camps or in these prisons. And SDF doesn't want to give away this file without addressing kind of more important files that have to do with its autonomy and its military. The third part is a more positive one, is that there has been a push to send inhabitants within the camps, to send them back to their countries. And more than half of these inhabitants are Iraqis, and Iraq is actually taking back some of these people. And also Syria or Damascus and SDF have been cooperating when it comes to Syrian inhabitants of this camp and sending them back to their communities, which is, I would say, a positive step.
Before we move to the topic of Russia and China, can I ask Neri also if you could share your thoughts on the prospects of Israel-Syria agreement, whether we're talking about the Golan Heights or more ambitiously about normalization?
Right. So, I mean, I was going to get to that in just a second, yes. But in terms of, just to pick up on what Manan said, the leverage that Syria has is Donald Trump, right? And this goes back to what the minister said this morning. Just look at what happened during the Soweto crisis this summer, where the Israeli Air Force bombed the Defense Ministry building in Damascus, and were bombing in other places, and then the Americans came in and said stop, and it was stopped. And some formula was worked out. You know, what was it? When Trump visited the Gulf, he met with Ashara, and he said he was what do you say, a good-looking guy. And all of a sudden, the rhetoric from Netanyahu and the Israeli government shifted, right? And so it's just one example of many, but on Syria, it's kind of quite front and center. Israel and Syria had been negotiating a security agreement, not dissimilar to what had been in place for nearly 50 years between the Assad regime and Israel in southwestern Syria and the Golan Heights. The disengagement agreement, security agreement, may or may not require some withdrawal of Israeli forces from the vast security zone that it now holds in southern Syria. The Golan Heights, I imagine, are off limits for Israel, both the government and the public. But the territory taken inside Syria, I think, is on the table, and finding some new regime, some new formula in terms of security. I think the Abraham Accords, a normalization agreement between Israel and Syria may be a bridge too far. Again, far be it from me, I'm not a Syria expert, but I think for even Ashara and his domestic position, I think would be a bridge too far, especially given the fact that the Gaza war is still ongoing. Maybe in the future, potentially, peace will break out, but not right now. So that's how I see it.
Okay. I follow my first argument on deep pluralism and the narrowing gap between the West and the rest. The emerging non-Western global powers like China, Russia, India are feeling the gap in the Middle East and probably other regions in the future. That's why the role of regions in the so-called New World Order is so important. This narrowing the gap doesn't necessarily mean that the West is weakening. It means that other countries across the globe are emerging as a global powers, okay? So decline of the Western power, I would call it, you call it, the lose of or decline of US influence in the region, in the Middle East, in West Asia, it doesn't necessarily mean that the United States is weaker, never. It means that there are other global powers that are there, that they have growing interest in the region, and they will have growing capabilities in the region. And there are countries like Iran in the region that are welcoming this and are benefiting, and they are accelerating this. And we saw somehow this in Iran, Saudi Arabians kind of rapprochement. What is so important about these kind of diplomatic acts mediated by China is that it happens without any Western power. And we know that United States and other Western powers are traditionally the key actors in the region to deal with these kind of important issues. Now we have, for the first time probably, a non-Western actor mediating in such a very important regional political kind of issue. And more importantly, it happens without even informing the Western powers and the United States. That means, okay, we are moving behind the so-called Western dominated hegemonic kind of politics in the region. And this is probably the post-United States region somehow. And again, it doesn't mean that United States is not present. It is there, and it will be there, and it has its own impact and effects. But it's declining. And China, Russia, and India are going to play a more important role in filling these gaps. Iran, of course, is effective in this process. China has a comprehensive strategic relationship with Iran, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, 5 more BRICS members from the Middle East, more strategic relationship between China and many other countries in the region. And what differentiates China with the United States that they are not interventionists, they have a business kind of minded approach towards the region and so on. And that also applies to Syria. In terms of Syria, we see that even Ahmad al-Shar still welcomes the positive role of Russia and Iran in the future, should the West fails to fulfill its promises on Syria. So even Syria should not be taken to granted as a kind of a Western entity in the region from now on. Therefore, I would say Russia and China are going to play more important role, probably India in the future in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleh. We have 4 minutes left according to the screen. So we'll take one final question.
Hello, my question is directed towards Mr. Zilber. So it's also to build on Dr. Saman's question. So I was curious to know whether the US pressure is the only way for the Gaza war to end. Because, I mean, there's a lot of international pressure as well, right? Like we see more and more countries like G7 countries are recognizing the Palestine state, though conditionally, but there's more and more states who are doing that. And like there's even the flotillas that are trying to break the Israeli blockade, you know, all these like international efforts, would they make a difference in pressuring Netanyahu to stop the war? And I guess like for other countries like China, Russia, and India, like they do, like China and Russia, like they do recognize the Palestine state and they do push for the two-state solution. But what could incentivize them to take a bigger role to actually intervene in this, considering that now there's just a lot of discussion about how, you know, the US is the only one who is able to stop Israel and is not doing that.
So I think there are two actors who can nudge/force Netanyahu to end the war. One is Donald Trump. The second actor is the Israeli public. And Donald Trump, far be it from me to get into his mind, he may lose patience, he may remain supportive, that could change tomorrow, but so far he seems supportive, at least of the looming offensive into Gaza City and escalation in a bid somehow to destroy Hamas, to get Hamas to surrender, to agree to Netanyahu's 5 terms, remains to be seen, but Trump could change. The Israeli public, different actor. You see a growing realization inside Israel, and this is borne out in opinion polling, it's borne out also in the growing number of people on the streets, that they are not only against the war vis-a-vis what had been true, getting the hostages back, but also against the war because of the rising cost to Israel itself of continuing with the war. And this can be measured in economic terms, it can be measured culturally, right? Israeli tourists going abroad and being protested, or Israeli artists not being welcome in various venues, by the way, not just in Western Europe. And it can also be measured in Israel's international standing and support for Israel or not, even from countries and governments that had been quite supportive, especially after Hamas's October 7th attack. Now, there is a growing realization amongst the Israeli public that support is shifting, that Israel's position is shifting internationally. Now, I don't think Russia and China are that critical in this regard. For Israelis, Russia and China are kind of a built-in kind of part of the anti-bloc, but other countries are not. And I would say, I know there are some representatives from various Arab governments here in attendance. Direct dialogue to the Israeli public would, I think, help continue to shift opinion domestically in Israel about the war, right? The rising cost to Israel and really Israelis of continuing with the war. I think the world at large, but particular governments in the world, and especially Arab governments, can speak directly to the Israeli public and show that. That and Donald Trump, I think, is our only shot.
Thank you very much, Neri. And this will be the last word of this panel. We'll continue the conversation actually on global powers in the next panel, which is dedicated to the Middle East and external powers. We'll break now for a coffee for 15 minutes, so please reconvene for our next panel at 11:45. And before that, please join me for a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.